Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for taking the time to be with us today. This is Alliance Advisors' four-part webinar series here, Actionable Insights for Your Business in Response to COVID-19. Really, what kind of the catalyst for this, just like most of the world currently here, the workplace has changed. And we really took a look at our leadership team and that experience that it is comprised of, and we thought that we ought to really take a good look at how we could help. And we thought we would start by running this four-part series on providing some of these insights to kind of help navigate through some of the recent changes, not just to our business, but to our lives. And we're all uncovering new pain points in these changes. And some new ones have been exposed, and it's really amplified some of the existing ones that we were just kind of living with. So in this webinar series, you're going to hear from multiple leaders from all three of the Alliance companies. That's Alliance Advisors, Technologies, and Systems. So we're looking forward to providing these 30-minute sessions that'll cover different areas of the business and share some critical adjustments that you can make and ones that you can anticipate needing to make as we kind of start the transition out of this. So let's start by meeting the MC. That's me. I'm Blake Cundiff. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Alliance Corporate. So really, my role with the company is to really just be a facilitator. I have 15 years of experience as a consultant, strategist, and a sales and marketing executive across multiple service industries. And so really what I've done is kind of brought that experience into Alliance Corporate, and to really, between the three companies, take a look at all the different problems that we solve across the everyday business operation and across the entire organizational chart. And with any potential clients or existing clients, since they're all different, my job is to really listen and pay attention to where their pain points are and how I can properly facilitate the right member of our talented teams to be able to take a look and see where we can help. So, but enough about me. We should really kind of meet the presenter here. Curt Kinney is the Vice President of Advisory Services. He's a multidisciplined senior executive and entrepreneur that has over 40 years of experience between operations, P&L management, product and market development, as well as startup. He believes strongly in a culture of mutual respect and professionalism throughout an organization, and that results in a work environment where people are motivated and loyal. His career is defined by numerous senior roles, all having in common developing and growing the top line of a business in a manner that is accountable to the bottom line. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the controls over to Curt to walk us through the agenda.
Thanks, Blake. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for sharing a few minutes of your afternoon. And we hope to make this a concise and valuable experience for you all and have some takeaway points that you can hopefully utilize in this changing environment that we're in today. Quickly, I'm just going to share what we're going to tell you, what we're going to talk about, and that's going to cover the basics. Not going to spend a lot of time on that because you're getting a lot of information overload about that type of thing. That's your financial options as far as loans and things like that. Then we're going to talk about what's next. What are some of the things that may be less traditional that you can think about in terms of how to grow and survive in this uncharted climate that we're in today. We're going to touch on new forms of capital that some of you may have already exercised and some of you may not. What kind of capital is available out there from what platforms, and what it means to you from an options and a cost standpoint. That could be valuable information for some of the folks on this call. And then we're going to touch on some of the less tasteful last resort. We feel we owe it to our clients and the folks on this to be blunt and to be honest about what's a worst case scenario, at least so you have your eyes open to it, hopefully to be avoided, but there are some potential wins with some of those as well. And then we're going to share a few final thoughts, talk about what's going to happen next week with our next presentation, which Blake will get into. And then we'll open it up to Q&A to see if you guys have any questions. We're going to keep this concise. Again, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So let's start with the basics. Like I said, this is some of the things that I think many of the folks on this call may have already been dealing with, but this just never let it go unsaid, or you know what they say about assuming. First and foremost, apply for any form of relief being offered, including SBA disaster relief. The unique thing about that, if you haven't heard about it, is that it does not go through a bank. It goes directly through the SBA. Take a look at the CARES Act. The CARES Act is 800 plus pages, but it offers a lot of different things that, such as the PPP. We have one client in particular, Benco Industrial, which is a forklift sales and service business, that applied for their PPP with the assistance of their bank and their accounting firm. And within 3 weeks from application, they were funded. Now that is run out of cash, but they're supposedly going to be adding more to it. Also included in the CARES Act, there are some provisions for net operating losses that could aid to your liquidity, because it could go back and redo the tax rate at which you were, the corporate tax rate, to a lower level in years that have already been filed. So there's things like that that you need to talk to your accounting firm about. Your CPA, your bank, and your attorney are going to be invaluable assets. Your accounting firm especially is on top of this. They have to be. They're doing a lot of late night reading to get up to speed with some of the different nuances that are included in that. Explore restructuring your company, and by that we talk about financially. Look at how your company is currently being financed. Talk to your bank about restructuring your loans. Talk to your bank about restructuring your mortgage. Depending on how much of your personal money you have into your business, anything that you can do out there right now to be able to restructure some of your debt is going to be an asset to you. Take a look at insurance on your receivables. This is something that's maybe not as obvious, but I heard just in the last day or two about 2 restaurants in Pittsburgh that are suing their insurer because they're refusing to honor a business interruption insurance, which they define as an act of God, and they're claiming at this juncture that this is indeed not an act of God. Not going to get into the weeds on that, but it's probably worth you having a conversation with your insurance carrier about what your insurance policy looks like should this have a more lasting effect on your business bottom line. So covering the basics as we just have, let's move on to then what? What other opportunities and options might there be to look at? The first thing that we encourage everyone to do is sit down with your accounting firm, your advisor, your bank, and put together a 6-month survival plan. In other words, let's make the assumption from the standpoint of this presentation. In business, it's always been a mantra that served me well, is to hope for the best and plan for the worst. So look at a 6-month survival plan that incorporates how much potential loss of revenue could this thing potentially result in? What's that going to look like to your balance sheet, to your ability to maintain payroll? What is your current cash position? And look under every nook and cranny, petty cash, anything you've got, as to what you can utilize to continue to keep the lights on. This would include conversations with your landlord. Everybody's in this thing, and it's a shared predicament, which we'll touch on a little bit further later on. Digital can play, in this time especially, since I would hazard a guess that the majority of the folks taking part in this are sitting at home or in their office alone, distanced, and working remotely in a manner they never have before. Well, most everyone is doing the same thing, so people have time. You can convene a Zoom call in a matter of minutes. So where you would have normally had 3 or 4 meetings a day, you're now having 6 or 7. What does your digital footprint look like to people who are interested in saying, okay, I might need to look at something, I've got the time now. So talk to your digital marketing people about the opportunities to expand your digital footprint right now, because candidly, we are not of a mind that that's likely to change. And if anybody needs referrals to people that can do that, we are certainly happy to help, and we have great connections and abilities in those respects as well. Differentiate yourself from your competition. I'll mention that one client of ours, again, a very good client, Benco. A big part of their business is going into their customers under contract and servicing forklifts, because forklifts are such a big piece of equipment. Most often that work is done on site. So what Benco has done is they've offered to put a truck out, you park your forklift outside your shop, we'll pick it up, they'll bring it back to their shop, they'll service it, they'll deliver it back to the outside of the facility, they'll completely disinfect it and turn the keys back over to you so as to minimize any sort of exposure. That's just thinking differently. How do you make yourself look different and offer more value. Things like that, that's a tangible industrial services business, but I think the correlation applies to most everybody that's on this. Deal with tough decisions regarding employees with empathy, but with firmness. They know this is not something that you created. Laying off people, especially for a small business person where you have a familial relationship with many of your employees, is difficult. But the reality is you're having to do it in order to be able to survive and offer them a job in 30, 60, 90, 120 days down, whatever that might be. They will appreciate and respect it. It's never good to have a conversation like that with an employee, but these are unprecedented times and they have to be dealt with in unprecedented manners. Let's discuss briefly new forms of capital that could be available to you if you feel like that's something you need. You'll notice at the bottom, we want to lead with the tagline, always utilize a reputable small business attorney. Many of you have great relationships with folks like this, but some of these can get enormously complex, and there is a lot of capital available out there right now. Some of it is looking at this opportunity, looking at this market conditions opportunistically, but just you need to be careful. So let's talk about what some of these options are. And this isn't rocket science, folks. It's just things that in the normal course of your business you may not have thought of previously. Debt. You can get a loan from a venture capital type of an operation that's strictly that. It's a loan secured against your company and your personal assets. It's generally at a higher rate of finance, a higher interest rate than you would get from a bank or the SBA. But oftentimes these people will look at the value of your business and secure it against, and they'll be a little less risk averse potentially. Not in every case. This is just one option to discuss, but it is one that some people may not understand, that venture capital options can at times involve a structured loan. But you just need to be careful about it because they could see opportunity in that as well. A pretty common one, and this applies to both venture capital as well as for some of your more mature businesses, a private equity play where you could get an investor to come in as an equity partner who would take on an ownership position in your company in exchange for a capital infusion. What that could look like varies widely all over the map. It could be them having a minority position, and there are groups that don't want to have a hands-on. They're investing in management in place. There are those who would want to take some sort of a control in your business, and you need to be very, very aware of that, of what that's going to look like when you may have built your business on the backs of your family, your generations, and your employees. So you could run the risk of having somebody sitting there next to you telling you what you're doing wrong from their standpoint. And by the way, we have enough ownership to have some power here. Be very careful with that, as you should with all of these. The final one that's fairly common out there is convertible debt, or you'll often hear referred to as convertible notes. These are usually structured as debt with a term of between 3 and 5 years. There's no hard, fast rule to that. They are put forth at a fair interest rate, but higher than you would typically be able to get from a bank. But what it does is it gives you an infusion of capital. Oftentimes they would want to set up a board and sit on that board. They have some oversight over the business, but it would not be an ownership. At the end of the term of the note, you have the option of either paying it back in full with interest and then taking your business back. And you may, or there may be provisions that are incorporated that allow them to convert their note, which is debt structure, to equity, and therefore they become an equity partner. Again, these can become enormously complex. They're not uncommon, and they're very, very legitimate and above board, but you need to have the advice of a reputable small business attorney that you have trust in, and they can work with you closely in that. The last resort is the one that the weeds that we don't want to go into, but I think it's obligatory on us to share with our clients and with the folks on this what that could look like. Some people have never wanted to think about it. Some people see what they see in the paper about bankruptcy, and that they form conclusions. But the reality is there are 3 basic forms of bankruptcy. Chapter 11 is for businesses only. And Chapter 11 allows for, it's a long and costly process, but it allows for a business to stay in operation and maintain business with the reduction of assets based upon the input from a creditors committee, generally comprised of both secured creditors such as banks and unsecured creditors, often vendors. That's a pretty simple distinction, but a pretty common one. And you want to be able to understand that this allows you to maintain control of your company. You will have a federally appointed trustee inserted into the process who will oversee your expenditures. But for example, the creditors committee could potentially sit down with you and say, okay, Mr. Smith, you have 10 trucks right now that you're running your business with. You can't, your debts exceed your assets, which is what forces you into a Chapter 11. We may need to look at getting rid of 5 of those trucks, even though it may be painful for you from the service standpoint, but the overhead is overshadowing the return that you're getting for it. So these can be tough decisions, but it does allow you to stay in control of your business, and that gives you the time to work your way out of it. This is a commonly used mechanism by both large and small companies who get themselves over their heads. You've been reading possibly about it's likely that Neiman Marcus is going to file Chapter 11 this week. A lot of the big retailers are filing. A lot of the big restaurant chains are filing. Their debts simply exceed their assets, and they have to find a way to restructure. This vehicle gives them. It is an application process, and it is not a guarantee that you will be accepted to be able to file Chapter 11. That goes before the input of the creditors committee back to the trustee, and then that decision is made on that level. Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is simply a liquidation, and there is no application process. You just submit yourself to the federal trustee and say, I am in a position where I have to liquidate my business. That's a last step. It is painful, but I have known business owners through my career who, at the point of having to face this, there is an enormous weight that lifts off the shoulders and allows people to restructure. They do. In fact, Chapter 7 can be filed both personally and corporately. If you file it personally, it does allow you to keep a house. It keeps your basic assets, although not as many as you would in another personal chapter we'll talk about here in a second. But it does allow you to maintain some equity in your basic provisions. But everything else is then liquidated to go back and pay debts. The final that you hear referred to is for Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is for individuals only. It is not a corporate chapter filing, but it does allow you to maintain, it allows you to structure a schedule of repayment through a federal trustee that allows you to keep your home, your cars, most all of your furnishings. Really doesn't force you to liquidate too much, other than it does take you and protects you from credit cards and some of your secured as well as unsecured debts like second mortgages, where it rolls everything into one consolidated payment that's lower than what you're paying right now. As it applies to your company, it depends on how much of your own personal net worth and assets you have tied up in your business. Chapter 13 can be utilized, and it gets very gray, and that's why the involvement of a credible bankruptcy attorney for any of these options is critical. And again, we have relationships where we can gladly refer people over for those types of conversations. So that's the bittersweet pill, but we just feel we owe it to you to have that conversation. The final thoughts on this, these are, those of us who are old enough remember 9/11, and so most of us all that lived through the last recession. Both of those events we thought would be life-changing, and they have been. These are the toughest times we've ever lived through. It seems like, based upon no statistic other than timelines, we're getting to a point in our world where something along the lines of every 10 years, something catastrophic happens that changes the way we live. As small business owners, we're having to think about our companies in ways we never have. 9/11 changed travel for the rest of the world, for the rest of time. We'll never go back to what it was before that. The recession changed how we perceive and work, and at times work with banks. We are of a mind that this pandemic world that we as 21st century business people are now confronting is going to change how we do business going forward. And I think it's imperative that we all look at that with eyes wide open and say, okay, what got us here may not be what we're going to need to survive these times going forward. So we just encourage a dialogue, to have discussions. We're happy to offer our insights, our referrals, our introductions. We're in this thing together. The banks are having to shoulder their fair share of this. Large corporations, public corporations, as well as private equity owned businesses, they're not paying their rent anymore. And I'm talking about locations with multi-hundreds of retail facilities. They're just not paying because they can't. And they're having to furlough employees for the first time. We just have to think differently and be aware that we're in this together. It's a shared predicament. And I'd just like to wrap up with that. And at this point, we'll move on to, like as I said, we feel like this is going to change business going forward. So at this point, I want to thank you for your time. I'll turn this back over to Blake, and we can go from there with a Q&A if anybody has any questions. But I just want to thank everyone for their time and attention, and hope you've taken some value.
Thank you, Curt. That was excellent insight. Appreciate you drawing on your experience to share all that with everyone. I know Curt and I had talked a few times over the last week or so as we put this together about him making himself available to be able to schedule some time with anyone that needs further clarification or just some feedback and bounce some ideas off of. Curt's contact information will be on a slide later on, and I'm happy to share that with you separately if you want to reach out to me. So before we jump into Q&A, looking ahead to what's next week for part 2, we're excited to have Curt Ross, who's our Senior Director of Staffing Solutions. He's going to be driving us through his outlook on how you can remain attentive and proactive in identifying and bringing the right talent for your organization, even in a difficult time like this. Probably even more relevant during a time like this on how staffing will look as we kind of come out of that. So we're really excited for Curt to be running that next week, and we hope that you can join us for that one as well. So I had a few private messages come in through the chat. If anybody else has any, feel free to fire away. But Curt, if you're up for it, I'm going to give you a couple of the ones that I wrote down that came up a few times.
Sure.
The first one, which I thought was a fair question, asked a few different ways, but really came down to, is advisors cover all different parts of the business, or is there any kind of particular department that you guys really just focus on?
It's a good question, and I didn't touch on it intentionally, but it's a good point to talk about. Right now, our prime focus is on operations. My personal background is in startups, turnarounds. I've done startups of my own. I've done startups within publicly traded companies. I've done growth. We've done M&A, but everything from a manufacturing, Lean Six Sigma, agile, quality quality control in terms of getting people in place, team building. So the operational component, and I'm sure some of you on this call have strong operating and manufacturing backgrounds as well. So that's me. That's my personal. We have a lot of associates, senior partners who are very, very strong in the financial C-suite, semi-retired or decades-long experience. We just have people that are not ready to retire yet, and so they're great at project work, and we can put them in. They've been strategically very, very helpful to our clients. With the addition of Curt Ross as our Senior Director of Staffing Services, we've got now a staffing and HR component that Curt brings several decades of experience to, very, very high level professional, having come out of enterprise and most recently commerce. So we are looking at opportunities to get ourselves into healthcare and into education, as in learning units, and doing program implementation, project management skills, things like that. But our core assets right now are focused on finance and finance operations and talent acquisition.
Very good. The next question that I had was, do you just focus on startups? So
no, we have experience with startups. Myself, as some of our associates have done startups of our own, like I say. But no, we have mature clients. We have clients that have been in business for 15 years and are looking to grow their strategy, or looking for a growth strategy to as their business looks different than it did 5 years ago. So no, we are not looking at just startups whatsoever. We do have an active, myself and a few others are actively involved in programs like Arch Grants, where we offer ourselves as mentors and judges and coaches to help these businesses launch. And that's just part of our commitment to give back to the community. But no, and size-wise, mid to small, by mid, I say $100-ish million and down is our sweet spot, where we have the most boots on the ground experience within our core group of professionals.
It's great. And then I had a few that came in around the same topic, so I'm just going to kind of merge them together. It's on the topic of bankruptcy here. Will that hurt my business's reputation, and what's the best way to kind of relaunch if that's the only option that they have?
I think there is less a stigma associated with bankruptcy today than there ever has been. Some of you may have heard in the last 24 hours even, the Senate, notably Mitch McConnell. As of today, cities can file bankruptcy. States cannot. He's putting out there for consideration, maybe we should let states file bankruptcy, because the stigma associated, many corporations, this isn't a political, this is an observation. Our own president has filed bankruptcies within his companies. It's a device that's used to ensure the survival of the company. And it's been my experience that the negative stigma associated with bankruptcy isn't what it was 10, 15 years ago. It is a tool that's being more commonly utilized, but again, it is critical to get good, solid legal guidance when you go about that. So I am not the one who's going to say you need to worry about the reputation of the company. You did it to help your business survive. You did what you needed to do in unprecedented times. Get out in front of that and own it.
Okay, very good. And in the interest of time here, we're going to cover one more, just a question around venture capital and where someone could start. What would you recommend there?
It depends on who you already know in the space. Some of the people on this call I know have relationships. We're happy to make introductions. It's based on a conversation of what you perceive your needs to be, what you want, what type of capital you're looking for. And what we have in St. Louis is a microcosm of boutique investors. The term you'll hear used in private equity and venture capital is dry powder. That refers to capital that's sitting on the sidelines waiting to go to work. I think that there are those in this city, in this region, who are going to look at this opportunity to put capital into businesses that are struggling to help them come back to the forefront of what they were success-wise. We are happy to have that conversation with you, refer you to some introductions as to people we think that might be of most, depending on the kind of business you have. There are people out there that like to invest in manufacturing, in industrial, in technology, in healthcare. So it's really not one answer for that. It's a matter of a conversation which we're happy to engage with.
Great. Okay, so as we kind of hit the home stretch here, wanted to just kind of highlight a summary here, a little bit more about Alliance Advisors specifically. This group is formed to provide our clients top-tier, highly diverse senior professionals, each of them having decades of experience that ranges from startups to multi-billion-dollar publicly traded corporations. The focus is to provide high-quality, value-focused, solution-driven consulting services, which is, in my mind, a pretty good summary of what you and the group do over there, Curt. So hats off to you for outstanding presentation today. And I'm excited to be able to share this. So here's Curt's contact information. Any of you that were asking questions that want to get a little more out of the answer than we were able to provide in kind of a shorter term, some of those answers could be a lot longer discussions. So please check out our website. We also have a LinkedIn page. But here's Curt's direct contact information. Don't be shy about reaching out to him for more info on what we discussed.
We're happy to have a conversation with any of you. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you for taking time out to spend with us today. Hopefully we'll get to do the same next Thursday when we get to hear from Kirk Ross on staffing. So thanks a lot, everyone. Have an outstanding day.